I first saw him on a Tuesday evening, standing perfectly still across the street from my apartment building. He wasn't facing me exactly, more like his head was turned just enough to suggest he was aware of me, watching me out of the corner of his eye. At first, I thought he was just some guy waiting for a ride, maybe a neighbor I'd never noticed. But the next night, he was there again. Same spot, same posture, same stillness. The strange part wasn't just that he was always there. It was the way he seemed wrong in the light. The street lamp behind him didn't touch him, as if the glow bent away before it could reach his body. Even in broad daylight that following weekend, when I spotted him standing across the street as I left for groceries, his outline was somehow dim, as though the sun had skipped over him entirely. I told myself it was a trick of the eyes. My brain, maybe, playing with shadows and glare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. By the fourth evening, I realized something else. It wasn't just that he never moved closer. It was that I never actually saw him arrive or leave. One moment the street would be empty. The next, he'd be there. Always facing just slightly away, as though he wanted me to keep wondering whether he was really looking at me or not. But I knew. I could feel it in my chest, like the faint pressure of someone leaning in too close, breathing in a space that should be mine alone. It was just after dawn when I stumbled into the bathroom, half asleep, still clutching the warmth of my blanket around my shoulders. The mirror was fog from a shower I'd left running too long, but through the haze I saw him, standing in the far corner of the room. Same dim outline, same unnatural stillness. My breath froze. I spun around so fast my shoulders slammed into the doorframe, but the corner was empty. The towel rack rattled from the impact, the only sound breaking the silence. I told myself it was sleep in my eyes, that maybe my mind had stitched together shadows and my own reflection into something sinister. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I began catching him in reflections where he couldn't possibly be. In the black screen of my turned-off TV, he was behind me, closer than he'd ever been on the street. In the glass of my microwave door, I saw the blurred edge of his face, leaning in just enough for the outline of a mouth. Even the surface of my coffee in the morning, still and dark, once showed his silhouette just over my shoulder. The strangest part? When I turned around in those moments, he was never there. But every reflection showed him closer than before, as if the glass was his doorway, and he was learning how to step through. The first note was small, no bigger than a grocery receipt, folded neatly in half and tucked between two bills in my mailbox. "I'm almost there," it read, in handwriting so familiar it made my stomach twist. It was mine. Not just similar. Mine. The loops in the letters, the slight tilt to the right, even the faint smudge where my pen always presses too hard. I laughed it off at first, telling myself maybe I'd written it and forgotten. But why? And when? 2 days later, another note appeared. "You left the window unlocked last night." This time, my hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it on the stairs. I lived alone. My windows were all locked. Or, at least, I thought they were. That night, I checked every latch twice before going to bed, still feeling the phantom weight of the paper in my hand. The notes kept coming. Sometimes once a week, sometimes twice in a day. Always short. Always written in my own hand. "I like when you stay up late. You didn't see me in the kitchen. Stop closing the blinds." I went to the building manager, demanding to see camera footage of the mail area. He showed me the recordings himself. Hours and hours of grainy video. People coming and going, collecting their mail. But never anyone placing a note in mine. Sometimes the camera caught me walking up, opening the box, and pulling out an envelope that hadn't been there in the frame before. It was as if the notes were appearing between moments, slipped into reality when no one was looking. It started small, losing 10, maybe 15 minutes here and there. I'd chalk it up to daydreaming, zoning out while scrolling on my phone, forgetting what I was doing. But then whole hours began to vanish. I'd leave my apartment in the morning, and the next thing I knew, I'd be standing in a completely different part of the city, the sun lower in the sky, my phone buzzing with missed calls. Friends began asking strange questions. "Who was that guy you were with at the cafe? You seemed really into whatever he was saying." I'd blink at them, swearing I hadn't met anyone, much less talked to someone. They'd insist, describe him vaguely as tall or wearing dark clothes. But they could never remember his face. Eventually, my paranoia drove me to check the security cameras at a coffee shop one friend had mentioned. The owner let me scrub through the footage. There I was, sitting at a table by the window, laughing, gesturing like I was deep in conversation. And beside me was him. The figure was there, seated casually like any normal person, but his face, God, his face was wrong. It wasn't blurred in the digital sense, no pixelation or glitches. It was like the world itself refused to acknowledge it, smearing and bending around where his features should be. Every time my gaze in the footage met his, I could swear the distortion twitched, as if whatever was underneath was trying to push through. When the footage ended, I realized my hands were trembling so violently I'd left faint sweat marks on the table. The owner leaned over my shoulder and frowned. "Funny thing," he said. "I don't remember you having company that day." It began as a faint rustle in the dark, the kind of noise you tell yourself is just the building settling. But the clock beside my bed glowed 3:11 a.m. every time I woke to hear it. On the fourth night, I realized it wasn't random noise, it was a voice. My voice. At first, it was too soft to make out, a low murmur curling through the still air. I lay frozen, straining to listen. Gradually, the words surfaced. "Help me, please." I can't get out. The tone was desperate, ragged, the way I imagined I might sound if I were trapped somewhere dark and airless. My throat tightened as I whispered back, "Who's there?" The sound on the other side paused for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to think it had stopped, before it began again, faster this time, the words tumbling over each other. "It's me. It's you, don't let it in." My hand inched toward the lamp, every part of me trembling. The instant the light flicked on, the whispering cut off, like someone had pressed mute. The silence that followed felt wrong, heavy, like the air itself was waiting for me to turn the light back off. The next night, I stayed awake, watching the clock. The moment it clicked to 3:11, the voice started again, identical to mine, but closer, as if it were just beside my ear. And this time, beneath the pleading, I could hear something else. Another voice, deeper and slower, speaking words I couldn't understand, yet somehow knew were meant for me. I couldn't take it anymore. Nights filled with whispers, days stolen from my memory, that constant sense of being watched. It had followed me for weeks, maybe longer, and whatever this thing was, it was getting bolder. That night, I left the lights off and sat in the center of my apartment, waiting. The clock crept toward 3:11. The whispering began. My own voice, trembling and frantic, overlapping with something heavier beneath it. My skin prickled. My fists clenched so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. "What do you want?" I screamed into the dark. My voice cracked, echoing off the walls. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then I saw movement, slow, deliberate. The figure stepped forward from the corner where no one should have been able to stand. Up close, its darkness wasn't emptiness, but a shifting, roiling mass, like it was made from every shadow in the room pulled into one place. When it spoke, the sound came from my own mouth, even though my lips didn't move. "To go home, inside you." The lights overhead flickered violently, buzzing like trapped insects. My chest tightened as the air seemed to collapse inward, pulling toward the thing. Then it rushed at me, faster than I could move, faster than my brain could register. Cold and endless, swallowing the space between us in less than a blink. The last thing I remember before the darkness hit was the sensation of something pressing against my skin from inside. The days after the encounter blurred together, like someone had smeared my life into soft, indistinct edges. I woke in my bed, went through the motions of work, answered texts from friends. On the surface, everything looked normal, but there were cracks. Tiny fractures that only I seemed to notice at first. In the bathroom mirror one morning, my reflection lingered a split second too long after I turned my head. I froze. It was smiling, wide and deliberate, while my own face remained still. The smile didn't fade until I looked away, heart hammering in my throat. On the train, a little girl sitting across from me stared for a long time, her eyes going wider and wider until she started crying. Her mother pulled her close without a word, shifting to another seat. At the grocery store, a man pushing a cart down my aisle turned pale as soon as we made eye contact, abandoning his basket entirely before hurrying away. Friends said I seemed different, though they couldn't put their finger on why. They laughed nervously, brushing it off, but their eyes didn't meet mine for long anymore. And sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was silent, I would catch my reflection moving in the window. Not walking, not shifting, just leaning closer to the glass, as if it wanted to get a better look at me. The wind was sharp that night, biting through my coat as I stood on the cracked sidewalk. Across the street, warm yellow light spilled from the windows of a small, unfamiliar house. Inside, a woman moved between rooms, laughing into a phone, setting a mug of tea on a table, humming softly to herself. She never looked toward the street. I didn't know her name. I didn't need to. Somewhere deep in my mind, a voice that still sounded like mine was screaming, pounding against the walls of my thoughts, begging me to leave. But it was muffled, distant, easy to ignore. What mattered was the way her shadow moved in the light, how it clung to her feet, how it might fit so perfectly inside her. She disappeared into another room, and I stayed exactly where I was, hands deep in my pockets, watching, waiting. It struck me then dimly that I knew this scene well, standing still, unseen, letting the moment stretch until the air itself felt heavy. Somewhere far away, I remembered what it was like to be on the other side of the glass. The light in her living room went out, and I smiled.